I'm Frederick. They told me this in a whisper. Now, you'll hear it. Enjoy watching. On the outskirts of town, where the streetlights glowed dimly, as if they were afraid to draw attention to themselves, there was a place that shouldn't have been so calm on the outside. It was called the White Sheet, too clean a name for what lay behind its doors. From the outside, everything was sterile. Painted white walls, glass doors, neatly trimmed bushes along the facade, as if someone was desperately trying to disguise the rot within with a cheap facade of decency. But the locals knew. The White Sheet was a place where hypocrisy was served with a side of contempt, where service was determined by skin color, and the waiters' smiles smelled more fake than coffee from a day-old filter. That evening, like hundreds of others before it, everything began routinely. The kitchen was clanking. The cooks were cursing at each other. The waiters were lazily carrying plates out into the dining room. Jazz was oozing from the speakers on the walls, too soft for the atmosphere that was growing thicker with each passing minute. The guests, mostly white, men in shirt sleeves and women with forced smiles, were talking in hushed tones, not looking each other in the eye. They had come not for the food, but for the illusion of superiority that this place sold under the guise of coziness. By 9 o'clock, there was something unpleasant in the air. Not smoke, not steam, not the smell of fried meat. This was different. It was a tension that had no form, but was felt by everyone. In their skin, their breath, their nerve cells. Even the cooks in the kitchen had grown quieter, as if somewhere deep in their instincts, an internal bell had rung. Something was going to happen. The manager, a dapper man of about 40 with cold eyes, was walking around the dining room, pretending that everything was under control. He straightened the tablecloths, glanced sideways at his watch, and played with a bunch of keys in his pocket, an old habit he had when he was nervous. A couple was sitting by the window, a man in a tie and a woman with thick lipstick. They ate in silence, as if there was a wall between them, invisible and eternal. Near the bar, two young guys, locals, were loudly discussing who had been fired by the police for being too soft with a detainee. One of the waiters chuckled. The atmosphere inside was like a hot wire, tense, stretched to the limit, ready to snap. That's when the entrance opened. The door creaked, letting in something that immediately ruined the rhythm of the evening. He walked in slowly, tall, thin, with a straight back despite his years, leaning on a worn wooden staff. His skin was the color of dark honey, and his face was deeply lined, as if someone had hand-carved a map of all the humiliations he had endured. An old dog, black with grey spots on its muzzle, moved beside him almost silently, its eyes cloudy but calm, like an animal that had seen too much and learned to be silent about too much. They simply stood in the doorway, and that was enough to make the room freeze. Conversations died down. Someone dropped a fork. The woman at the window turned away to the glass. The man next to her pressed his lips together, as if holding something in. The manager tensed, but did not approach. He knew that he had to wait. The guest was in no hurry. He looked around the room, not looking for a seat, but as if assessing the level of poison he had just inhaled. This was not his first time here. He knew where he had come, and the dog, it just sat at his feet, breathing heavily, as if the whole journey to the restaurant was the final test. And then the waiter came up to them. Young, strong, with a shaved head and a grin, one of those who are confident in their impunity all their lives. His name was Danny, and he was proud to work here, not because he loved the food or the service, but because the place allowed him to be what he always wanted, a little dictator. He stopped right in front of the old man and said a phrase that should not have been said. "We do not serve vagrants with dogs." His voice was loud, half the restaurant, calculated to make sure everyone heard. The old man did not answer. He just looked. There was no fear or anger in that look, only fatigue, as if he had heard this phrase 100 times, and it no longer caused pain, only disgust. The dog stood up, as if he sensed danger, but Danny did not retreat. He leaned down, put his face close to the dog, and whispered something no one heard. Jazz growled, not loudly but quietly, as if in warning. And then it happened. A sharp movement of the leg, a blow, a dull thud, a whine. Someone screamed. Jazz flew off, hitting the leg of the table, and lay there, twitching. The old man was still silent. He stood like a statue, motionless, as if centuries of pain had frozen in him, and there was nowhere else to contain them. A silence fell over the restaurant, so thick you could hear the oil sizzling in the kitchen. No one moved. Even those who had been grinning now avoided eye contact. Only one man sitting in the far corner picked up his phone and started filming. He too was silent, but his hands were shaking. Danny took a step back, as if he were surprised at how hard he had hit. He didn't expect the dog not to jump up, bark, or bite back. He didn't expect the old man's dead gaze, which didn't even contain hatred, only the end. And at that moment, when nothing was happening, but everyone felt that something was about to collapse, the second act of this silent drama began. The old man leaned over, slowly, deliberately, picked up his cane and gently touched the dog. Jazz didn't answer. He didn't breathe. Only his eyes, half open, looked into space. The old man straightened up, took a step forward, and walked deeper into the room, not paying attention to what the manager was shouting at him, what the customers were saying, how the waiters were whispering. He passed like a shadow, like someone who is not seen because they don't want to see until it's too late. He sat down at the table, carefully placing his cane next to him, and folded his hands in his lap. No one dared to approach, not one of the workers, not one of the guests. He just sat, and then the man with the phone, the one filming from the corner, stood up. He walked slowly around the room, went to the door, and walked out without saying a word. 2 more followed him, then more. 10 minutes later, the restaurant was empty. Only the staff and the old man with the dead dog at his feet remained, and the camera, which was still filming. And no one, absolutely no one, understood that something far more devastating than the dog's death would follow that evening. It was only the first, barely audible blow on the glass before the storm that would sweep away everything, and nothing would ever be the same again. Он всегда ходил одной и той же дорогой, как будто эта тропа была выжжена в асфальте его шагами, от дома, что стоял на углу улицы с облезшими ставнями и ржавым почтовым ящиком, до конца квартала, где начиналась белая территория, часть города, где чернокожих не били прямо, но били каждым взглядом, каждым намеком, каждой вежливой фразой, полной яда. Его звали Мелвин, но никто не знал этого имени. Для прохожих он был просто тот старик с собакой, а для некоторых – старый нигер с псом. Он слышал это слово чаще, чем свое имя. Джаз шел рядом, никогда не отставал, никогда не тянул поводок, будто понимал каждое настроение хозяина. Его шерсть давно потускнела, тело ослабло, но глаза все еще были внимательны. Они вместе прошли войну, одну на фронте, другую дома. Melvin had been in the army when he was young, wearing a uniform, holding a gun, ready to die for a country that had come back to him with spit. The war was over, but the hatred remained. He had come back not as a hero, but as not someone who belonged in this neighborhood. The first time he had brought Jazz to that restaurant years before, the waiters had argued over whether to let the dog in. One had said, "Dogs are no problem, as long as they're clean, but maybe the old man should take a shower first." Melvin hadn't responded. He had simply sat in a corner where he wouldn't bother anyone. He had never asked for more than he needed. He had eaten slowly. He had left a tip even when he knew the food had come with spit in it. He had come back because it had been a test, a kind of self-imposed torture that he had accepted with pride. Jazz had been with him the whole time, a silent companion who had looked into people's faces and seemed to remember each one. People in the restaurant didn't like them coming. They didn't say it out loud, but their bodies spoke louder. Women turned away as if afraid the dog would steal something. Men chuckled and said, "That old man again." Someone once asked a waiter, "Does he ever pay or just sit there and breathe in his African spirit?" The waiter laughed and whispered, "He pays, but it still stinks." The words reached Melvin. He heard them, as he heard everything, but there was no anger in him, only a deep, seared weariness. He knew they weren't afraid of him. They were afraid of what he reminded them of, reminded them that their civilized facade was fragile, that their politeness was artificial. He was a mirror they didn't want to look at themselves in. On the night it all started, he arrived, as usual, a little after 8. He was wearing his best jacket, old and pilled, but neatly pressed. Jazz walked steadily, breathing heavily, as if inhaling the last air of this earth. They were met with looks full of condescension, as if they had broken some invisible taboo. One of the guests muttered, "Him again. How much longer can we put up with this show?" The woman next to him adjusted her hair and whispered, "Did you hear his dog howling? It sounds like a death knell." Melvin walked past, not taking his eyes off him. His cane clicked on the tiles of the room like a metronome of anticipation. He sat down at the same table by the wall. Jazz lay down at his feet. Everything was as usual, only the waiter was different. Young, aggressive. Danny. Melvin didn't like him right away. There was something about him, not just rudeness, but a learned disgust, like those who grew up in families where the word equality was pronounced with disdain. He didn't approach right away. At first, he stood at the bar for a long time, watching the old man get settled. Then he came up to him and asked without a smile, "Are you sure you have the right door?" Melvin answered calmly, "I came to eat." Danny laughed. It was short and sharp. "And here, we thought a new guard had arrived." He left without taking the order. Jazz looked after him and growled softly. The old man lowered his hand and touched the dog's head. "Quiet, boy. They are weak, because they are afraid." 5 minutes later, the food finally arrived. It was placed on the table with a loud thud, as if in front of a prisoner. The spoon was dirty. Melvin did not say a word. He began to eat, slowly. The taste was salty, from tears that were not there. Jazz stood up, sniffed the water coaster that another waiter had placed, silently, furtively. And then Danny came over, without warning, without reason. He leaned over to the dog and said, "If you growl again, I'm going to put you to sleep. Got it, dog?" Jazz stood up. The old man did too. And then came a phrase that had been heard many times in this restaurant, but now, too loudly. "You're both scum. This neighborhood isn't for you. This place isn't for you. And you, old man, remember, a dog is no reason to think you're a man." Everything around was quiet. The customers froze. Someone in the room smiled. Someone nodded, as if in agreement. The old man looked into the waiter's eyes for a long time. A very long time. Then he said, "When you were born, I was already burying friends who died, so you could talk like that." Danny grinned. "Well, now you're burying your dog." "Things change fast, Grandpa," Jazz barked. Once. And then came the blow. The leg, the crunch, the whine. The rest has already been described. But after the customers left, when the restaurant was empty and the old man was still sitting there was another level of silence. The manager tried to coax him out. He came over, bent down, said, "Mister, please, you're interfering with work." Melvin looked up slowly. He spoke softly. "Work? That's your job. Beat a dead man and hope he doesn't fight back." The manager recoiled. The old man stood up. He picked up his cane. He picked up Jazz. The dog was light, too light. He carried him out in his arms. At the door, he turned and said, "I'll be back tomorrow, so you'll remember me." No one knew at that moment that this night had already begun to crack under the weight of what was to come. The next morning, the city would wake up to a new headline on the news. But for now, there were only footsteps, one old man, one death, and one restaurant where someone thought nothing would change. Only the camera kept filming, and it remembered more than just the sounds. There was a truth left there that no one expected to see. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments what city or country you are from, where you are now listening to our stories. Has there been anything similar in your life? Injustice, humiliation, indifference? We read every message, and your opinion is really important to us. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next parts of this story. And now we continue. They never said it out loud, at least not loudly. But every time he walked in, the words hung in the air, spoken with eyes, gestures, turns of the head, sharp inhalations through the nostrils, and restrained grins. What is he doing here? Not as a question, but as an accusation. The people in the room did not understand why he was allowed in at all, why he kept coming back. Did he have no shame, No self-respect, no sense of boundaries. Did he not get the hint? The staff exchanged glances with the guests, especially the regulars who already had their own privileged position. Those who left tips in bills and not in change. Those who never saw dirty dishes on their table and got their dishes before everyone else. These guests did not complain directly, but the waiters knew when to come over and speak a little louder, when to wipe the table next to Melvin for an especially long time, demonstrating that we see you. It was on this particular evening, with the air thick with hostility, that all this became especially clear. He came in, without jazz. His steps were a little slower, his shoulders a little lower. Those who had seen the scene the night before now looked on with a different fire in their eyes, a mixture of triumph and venomous interest. It was as if someone had expected the old man to come today to humiliate himself completely, and this fact aroused their pleasure. The first whisper rolled through the room like a weak current. The woman in the red dress, sitting by the window, leaned toward her companion and almost whispered in his ear, but loud enough for the waiter to hear. He came alone. So that dog is dead. The man nodded without looking into her eyes. I thought he wouldn't show up after yesterday. They usually run as soon as they get punched in the face. The waiter who heard this, not Danny, but another, older one, suppressed a grin. He was the one who knew how to play. He would walk up to the old man, ask with false politeness if he would like to sit in the corner, where he would be less visible. And it would not seem racist. It would be space management. Melvin sat. Not in the usual corner. He sat in the center of the room. It was a challenge. It was a silent slap in the face to all those who thought he could be pushed into the shadows. At the next table, a guy in an expensive suit was scrolling through the news on his phone. He looked up as the old man sat across from him and immediately squinted as if the sun had hit him in the face. He turned, called the waiter and said, "I'm not comfortable. Move him away from me. Or move me." The waiter said, "Sorry, sir, all the tables are taken." The man exhaled angrily. "Then let him clean up himself. I pay, he doesn't." It was a lie. Melvin always paid, sometimes even more than necessary. He simply paid silently, without provocation, without bragging. But no one cared. The old man sat with his hands on the table and stared ahead. His face was motionless, as if he were present, but his mind was elsewhere. The staff knew what to do on nights like these. They had been instructed. If he came, avoid eye contact. Don't ask how he was. Don't offer the menu unless he asked. It was called the Silent Isolation Protocol, a tried and true method for weeding out an unwanted customer without breaking the rules. And it worked. Almost always. The whispers grew louder, bolder. "Why didn't he die in the war if he loved being a hero so much?" someone at the bar said. "I'm sure he just comes here to die in public," the woman next to him chimed in. The manager came out of the back room to check on the situation. He looked around the room, saw that the atmosphere was tense but controlled. The old man did not speak, so everything was under control. He nodded to the waiter and disappeared back. Melvin finally spoke. He did not stand up. He simply said, "My dog is dead. He lived longer than most of you will honestly live." Silence fell over the room like a heavy cloth. He did not address anyone in particular, but everyone understood that he was speaking to everyone. The waiter, the older one, came over and said in an even voice, "Sir, can I get you anything?" And Melvin answered, "Silence and bread." It sounded almost like a spell. Bread and silence. The two things he had lacked all his life. While he waited, Danny stood up on the other side of the room. He had come in late for his shift. He saw the old man and immediately went to him without waiting for the command. He walked slowly, with a predatory smile, as if he felt that this was his stage, his moment. He stopped next to the table, leaned over and said, "I heard you have a table without a leash now." Someone in the room chuckled. Melvin didn't answer. Then Danny went on, "You know, I thought you were going to die of grief, but you're a tough bastard. Or maybe just deaf." He straightened up, looked out into the room, smiled as if to say, "See, I'm not afraid." The old man spoke again, His voice was as quiet as the rustle of pages. I heard you hit him. I heard him wheeze. And I heard you laugh. You think this will go away? No. It's already in you. It'll rot you from the inside out. Danny froze, just for a second. Then his face went stony again. He said, I'd do it again. And to you too. Because you come here like you have a right. But you're nobody. The plate of bread landed on the table with a bang. The waiter who brought it put it down quickly and left without saying a word. Melvin took the piece, broke it in half, slowly put it in his mouth and said, And you're already dead. You just haven't realized it yet. After these words, the room seemed to freeze. Someone in the far corner started filming. Again. Not out of pity. Out of fear that this would again become something that everyone would want to see, but no one would want to remember. Passers-by began to gather behind the glass of the restaurant. Some recognized the old man. Some, the waiter. The video from the night before had already started to get thousands of views, but those who were inside did not yet know that they were becoming part of the next frame. And the old man just ate the bread, silently, as if nothing had happened, as if everything that was happening was normal, and perhaps for him it was. His name was Danny, and there was nothing unusual about it until it began to be heard more and more often, first among customers, then among the staff, and later outside the restaurant, as the name of someone who had finally shown them their place. He did not immediately become the hero of the evening. He was moving towards it. Danny was not just a young waiter. He was a product of a certain environment, one where children are taught not just to be polite, but to be polite to the address, where they do not say black at the table, but at home they say, you don't have to, smile at those who are not yours. He grew up in a house where his father watched television with perpetual irritation and commented on the news with the words, why are they so upset again? They were given the right to vote, and that's enough. His mother, a fragile woman, taught in a private school and taught her son to hold his chin up high, so that they can immediately see that you are not one of those who hang out with street people. And on Sundays, they went to church, where the pastor spoke of love for everyone, but the sermons often included, God created order, and when someone rises above their level, he intervenes. Danny absorbed it like a sponge, and when he got a job at the White Sheet, he felt that he had finally found himself in a place where his inner world resonated with the atmosphere. There was no need to hide contempt here. It was enough to speak a little quieter, smile a little harder, serve some guests a little slower. And this was considered the norm. He quickly became a favorite of the management. He had a quick response. He could please the right people. And, most importantly, he knew who he could slow down without fear. With clients who didn't fit in, he was professionally cruel. His manners were poisonous, his phrases with a touch of friendly superiority. When the older black man first walked into the restaurant, Danny noticed more than just the old man. He noticed the dog. It was the perfect hook, a way to humiliate without being called racist. He waited. The first few times he stayed away. He watched, studied, built scenarios in his head, how he could hurt but make it look like a response to a rule violation. He tried different methods, bringing the food last, forgetting the silverware, miscalculating the bill. The old man said nothing, always said nothing, and that was what pissed Danny off the most. He wanted a scream, a reaction, an outburst, anything to throw him out. But nothing happened, and Jazz, the dog, kept looking at him, didn't bark, didn't bare his teeth, just looked, and that look was worse than any scream. He felt the desire to crush, to destroy, to wipe that silent pride off the face of the earth. That night, when he hit, he didn't feel fear. He felt relief. It was the culmination of pent-up hatred. He didn't think about the consequences. He just wanted to break. And when he hit, at first he felt a flash of euphoria. Then, nothing. Only a ringing silence in which it seemed to him that even the walls were breathing differently. And then, a whisper. The whisper of the room. People didn't judge. People didn't sympathize. They just were. Someone was looking at their plate. Someone was secretly filming. Someone was nodding secretly, silently saying, "Yes, that's right." That was all he wanted. Confirmation, affirmation, affirmation that he was superior, that he could do such things, that he had the right, and that was the beginning of his heroism. After that night, he became the center of attention, not in public, not yet, but inside the restaurant. The waiters nodded respectfully. The manager patted him on the shoulder and said, "You overdid it a little, but I understand." The cook sent a pastry from the kitchen. For the hero. He got a taste of power. He began to act differently. Every movement he made became even slower. Every serving of a dish was accompanied by hidden sarcasm. When a young black couple sat down at the table, he put water in front of them and said, "We serve free bread for everyone who couldn't afford it before." They said nothing. He left, satisfied. His smile grew bigger. His walk, more confident. When he saw Melvin again, alone without Jazz, he felt a pulsating excitement, as if the hunt was not over, as if the old man had returned for more. He approached, no longer playing a role. He spoke directly, sarcastically, with pleasure, and the audience saw it, but did not interfere, because no one wanted to be the one protecting the old black man. It was a risk. It was a mark. Danny felt like a king. He watched the audience's reaction and enjoyed the silent approval. It was like a drug. He began to return to the old man again and again. He would say, "Are you unaccompanied today? I hope it's not because of yesterday. You understand, everything is according to the rules." Or, "Your order will be ready in about 20 minutes. We have more important clients here." He said it loudly without hiding, and when one of the customers began to smile, he felt invincible. He became a hero for those who dreamed of humiliating him, but were afraid. He became their voice, their tool. He began to receive approval even from the outside. Someone cut out the video of him hitting the dog and captioned it, "This is how you should treat homeless people." The comments were appropriate. Good. A real man. Weaklings out. Danny began to believe it. People began to recognize him. They came up to him, not often, but with approval. "Are you the one?" they asked with narrowed eyes. He nodded. He was proud. He was no longer just a waiter. He had become a symbol, but he did not understand that symbols break. That power built on hatred always turns against. He did not feel the whispers behind his back changing. He did not notice that some colleagues began to avoid his gaze, that people appeared in the room who did not order anything. They just sat and watched. That more and more passers-by were standing in the window. He did not know that the video posted yesterday was getting millions of views, that editors were already contacting lawyers, that one woman, whose daughter loved dogs, wrote a post that collected hundreds of thousands of reposts. He did not know that the hero of the evening would soon become the main target. And for now, he continued, he could not stop. He was sure that now, he was unattainable, that nothing will happen to him. He was already sure that he won. Only Melvin, sitting at his table, silently staring ahead, knew that this story was just beginning, and that the real price for cruelty does not come immediately. It comes slowly, deeply, without warning, and by the time you understand, it will be too late. He was no longer hungry. He knew that food here was not about taste, not about satiety. Here, every order was a step into the swamp, and he walked into it consciously. That evening, the old man sat in the center of the room again, in full view of everyone. His cane stood next to him, like a silent companion, and his hands lay on the table, in the same position in which people usually pray. Only he was not praying. He was waiting. There were young people sitting nearby, 3 men, one loud, with a ring on his finger and a cigarette in his teeth that had long since gone out. They were talking about business, women, cars, but when he sat down next to him, the conversation turned in a different direction. One of them said, "It smells like dog in here. Or is it just me?" The other answered, "No, it doesn't seem so. The remnants of the old era are still here." The laughter was loud, ostentatious, like the laughter of people who need to assert themselves at someone else's expense. The old man did not answer. He did not move. He just looked. Not at them, through them, and it was unbearable. The waiter, the same Danny, came over with the menu. He held it out like an order, not a suggestion. He handed it to him like you throw a bone to a dog. He asked, "Ready soon?" "This isn't a cafeteria." His voice was flat, not even aggressive. Just tired. Tired of still having to serve people like this. Melvin nodded. He ordered soup. Hot. Lentil soup with croutons. It was his usual choice. Simple, no frills fare. Not because he couldn't afford it, but because he didn't want to. Danny left. 7 minutes passed. Then 15. Then 22. No soup. The people at the next table had already gotten their desserts. One of them remarked, "I guess the cook's afraid of getting burned while he's cooking for the veterans." Laughter. Loud again. Waiters passed by, not looking at the old man. He waited. His face didn't change. He didn't move. He didn't call. He just waited. When the soup arrived, it was all decided. It was an action, not a mistake. Danny came out of the kitchen, holding the plate awkwardly, as if he was balancing it on purpose. He wasn't in a hurry. His movements were theatrical. He approached slowly, with a forced politeness that could be heard scraping. And when he put the plate down, it slipped. Too sharply, too precisely. Splash. Liquid. Thick. Dark. Spilled onto the table. Onto the old man's hand. Onto the edge of his jacket. The croutons fell right into his palm. Someone in the neighbors giggled. One whispered, "Soon he'll melt like this soup." Danny pretended to be scared. "Oh, sorry. Accidentally. My hand slipped." But there was no apology in his voice. There was something else. Provocation. Challenge. He didn't offer a napkin. He didn't offer help. He just stood there, waiting for the old man to say something. Melvin looked at his hand. Slowly wiped the soup on the edge of the table. He looked up. "Your hand didn't slip. It's just that your soul fell a long time ago." The room grew quieter. Danny pressed his lips together. There was no answer, but there was action. He grabbed a napkin from the next table and threw it in front of the old man. "Here you go. Wipe your wisdom." The old man didn't move. He kept looking. There was no anger in his gaze, but there was something there that made you want to turn away. And then the following happened. The first push. It wasn't strong, almost symbolic. Danny put his hand on the old man's shoulder and helped him move away from the table, but he did it with force, with humiliation, as if he were moving not a person but furniture. Melvin staggered. His cane crashed to the floor. He didn't fall, but the room froze. The crowd in the restaurant sensed that this was no longer just a mockery. This was no longer subtle mockery. It's an act, physical, real. Someone in the corner pulled out a phone. Someone looked away. Danny stood up straight, breathing heavily. He hadn't expected it to be so quiet. He'd expected applause. What he got was silence. The old man straightened up. He picked up his cane. He looked up, and he said just one word. "Too late." It sounded like a sentence, not a threat, a statement of fact. At that moment, a woman walked in, young, wearing glasses, holding a phone. She looked at the old man, then at the waiter, and asked loudly, "Was that you in the video beating the dog?" Danny froze. For the first time in a long time, he felt something falling from the outside. Too fast, too precise. He wanted to say, "Not me," but it was too late. She was already streaming. The camera was pointing at him. It's him. The one. From White Sheet. The people in the room froze. Then a murmur began. Passers-by began to gather outside the doors, one by one. People with phones, people with questions, people who knew. The video had reached millions, and now they had come to watch, to judge. Danny turned pale. He stepped back. The manager ran out, started shouting, "Stop it! Turn off the cameras!" But it was too late. It was already happening. The old man stood up, slowly, raised his cane, turned toward the exit. I came for justice, and I got a show. Now let the audience decide. He walked toward the door, slowly, proudly, and behind him, a look. There was no contempt in every look now. There was fear, a new fear, the fear of being on the losing side. Danny stood still. He realized his push was the last one. He had not pushed a man. He had pushed his entire career, his role, his illusion of impunity, into the abyss. And now there was no stopping him. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Have there been moments of injustice, humiliation, or pain in your life that you still remember? Your opinion is important to us. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the continuation. And now we continue. He was always there for him. Jazz wasn't just a dog. He was a shadow, a breath, the last link to something warm in this embittered world. The veteran and his dog. It was silence amid the din, trust in an era of hypocrisy. Jazz didn't bark in vain, didn't jump, didn't beg. He just walked next to him, looked, breathed. Sometimes his muzzle lay on his master's knee, and that was enough to keep him from going crazy. The old man had said more than once that Jazz was the last one left. No family, no friends, no people who had been to war. Everyone was gone, and only he remained. And now, when everything was rolling in the mud, when even a chair in a restaurant had to be fought for as territory, it was Jazz who reminded him, you are not alone. And that is why, when Danny raised his leg, it was not just a blow to the animal. It was a symbolic act. It was as if someone had kicked memory itself, kicked loyalty, kicked the very possibility of love. The blow was sharp, precise, into the ribs, a dry crunch and a sound that would forever be etched into the heads of those who had simply sat and watched. Jazz squealed, as if a cry of all the pain that had been hushed up in this place for years had burst from within. He collapsed, his paws buckled, his eyes wide open, like someone who couldn't believe that he had been hit for no reason. The old man didn't react right away. His brain didn't have time to digest it, not because he didn't understand, but because he didn't want to believe that someone could do this while looking into his eyes. Then, movement. He bent over, quickly, at his age, almost at the limit. Jazz was breathing quickly, weakly. Foam appeared on his lips. There was silence all around. Absolute. Suffocating. Someone tried to get up but immediately sat down. The waiters froze. One even took a step forward, but froze. You could see the realization dawning in his eyes. Something irreversible had happened, and he had become a part of it. Danny stood motionless, and for the first time, he was confused. He hadn't expected it to be like this. He wanted to humiliate her, to piss her off, to make her leave. He didn't think the dog would die, but she was dying. She was lying on her side, her chest rising and falling more and more slowly. The old man was holding her head, whispering something. No one heard the words, but everyone saw a tear roll down his cheek. One, a single one. And that was where all the power lay. He wasn't crying, he wasn't sobbing, he was just letting go. And at that moment the room began to buzz. Someone was taking out their phones. Someone was whispering. He hit the dog, right in front of everyone. And no one was saying it was justified. Even those who had been grinning before were now silent, because this wasn't just an old man in front of them. In front of them was a man who had just had his last thing taken away from him, in front of everyone. And it was no longer funny, not playful, not according to the rules. This was an animal. Real, too real. Danny began to back away. His eyes darted from one face to another. He was looking for support, approval, anything. But the audience was looking at him like they were looking at a person who had done something they would not forgive. He spoke, confused. The dog growled. I got scared. But his voice was shaking. He knew he was lying, and everyone knew, because Jazz didn't growl. He was silent. He just sat. All he had done was look, and for that look, he was killed. The old man stood up. Jazz was still breathing, barely. His body was shaking. He picked him up in his arms. At his age, It was almost a super effort, but he picked him up, not like a thing, like a friend, like a son, like the last light, and he carried him. Across the entire room, past the tables, past the eyes. Everyone made way, not a word, not a movement, as if time stood still. He reached the exit. He stopped at the door. He turned around and said, "There's nothing left to die here," and he left. No one knew where. No one dared to follow. Only later, when passers-by began to gather outside the doors, when the video of his dog appeared on social media, when the comments, tears, threats, protests began, only then did the restaurant understand what had happened. But it was too late. Very late. It wasn't just a dog that died in the white sheet that night. The feeling of control died there. Their silent right to be above others died there. And perhaps, for the first time since its founding, the walls of the restaurant understood that they would now remember not those who sat in the room with glasses of wine, but the one who carried out his dead friend in his arms, the dog, whom they called Doggy. And they hit him, just because they could. The blood was almost invisible at first, a thin streak running down the white tiles like someone had spilled cherry tea carelessly. But the smell was different, metallic, heavy, real. No one knew how he had even carried the body to the door. The dog was light but not weightless, and his arms were shaking, his joints aching, his breath coming in short gasps. But he carried it. He leaned on his cane, clenched his teeth, not looking back, as if the darkness was behind him, and he knew that if he turned, it would devour the last of his spirit. And the blood, it ran down his sleeve, dripped from Jazz's dead mouth, stretched behind him in stains that no one would dare wipe away for a long time. He walked out like a man who had lost everything, not because he was broken, but because the last part of him that was attached to this life had died. No one followed him. No one dared. Even Danny stood there, his fingers gripping the edge of the bar, pale as a wall. He felt like something was wrong, that this hit wasn't a victory, but the beginning of the end. The air in the room had turned thick as tar. People looked at each other, but no one spoke. For the first time all night, racism wasn't a game, not an innocent social habit, but a crime that everyone was witnessing. People were starting to gather behind the glass. Someone was pulling out a phone. Someone was streaming. Someone was calling out to others. Within a minute, there were 10 people outside the restaurant. Within 5, 20. They weren't coming in. Not yet. They were watching, and those inside could feel the eyes from outside burning into the walls. The manager tried to pretend nothing terrible had happened. He told the bartender, "Clean up the blood, now, no comment." The bartender refused. He just looked down and turned away. He wasn't a saint, but he wasn't a scumbag. He couldn't wipe the blood off the floor like it was ketchup from a sandwich. Then the manager himself took a rag, squatted down and started scrubbing. Hard, fast, with a dull hiss of teeth. The blood didn't go away right away. It ate in, left marks. He scrubbed harder until he tore the fabric. Then he crumpled the rag, threw it in the corner and whispered, "Oh God, that old man is dead." And at that moment, someone walked through the door again, but it wasn't him. A young guy with a phone. 2 more followed him. A girl in a hoodie, an old man in glasses. They didn't walk in as customers. They walked in as witnesses. They didn't sit down. They didn't order. They just took out their phones and started filming. Slowly, silently. Around the room, at their faces, at the waiters, at the counter, at the floor. One of them pointed the camera at Danny. He flinched, tried to cover his face. The guy said, "It's too late. Millions have already watched." The manager jumped up, started talking, demanding that the cameras be removed, but no one was listening. He was a nobody. He had no control over anything anymore. The place belonged to the audience now. And then something strange happened. People who had left earlier started coming back into the restaurant. The couple by the window. The woman in red. Yes, even them. They had come back, not to eat, but to see how it would end. There was no remorse in their eyes. only the fear of being involved. The fear that now their faces would be in the frame. Danny stood rooted to the spot. His face was ashen. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. Then he rushed toward the exit, breaking through the crowd. Someone shouted after him, "Murderer! You kicked an old man in the heart." He didn't answer. He disappeared. Disappeared like a rat sensing the approach of water. No one followed him, but the cameras kept filming. And then, almost an hour after the blow, the old man returned, alone, without his dog. His hands were empty. His fingers were shaking. The cane was tapping louder than before, but he walked straight, past the crowd, through the doors, stopped at that very table, and only then did he speak. "You saw death. You were silent. You did nothing, because you were used to thinking that we are not people, that our lives are a background for your conversations. You were waiting for me to cry, for me to ask for forgiveness, for me to disappear, but I will not disappear, because blood does not wash off, even if you do not see it." The room was silent. He continued, "My Jazz did not die from a blow. He died from your silence. And now this place is not a restaurant. It is a crypt. You do not feed people. You bury them. One piece at a time, one look at a time, one word at a time, every day." He walked up to the counter, put down his cane. "I will be back tomorrow. And if tomorrow there is even one of those who kept silent today here, I will tell this story in every house, in every school, at every crossroads. And let them try to erase this stain then." He left, for the second time. And this time many came out after him, not because they wanted to support him, but because they could not breathe. The blood on the tiles dried, but the mark remained. And in everyone who was there that evening, there remained a look. That same one, dead, glassy, unseeing. Jazz's look, the look of the one who was called a dog and killed for no reason. Just because they could. This was supposed to stay inside. The walls of the white sheet were built not of brick and plaster, but of silence, of habit, not to notice, not to speak, not to interfere. Every look, every remark, every gesture, everything was carefully worked out over the years, honed to the point of reflex. Those who came there knew, here you can feel superior to others without saying so directly. They didn't just serve food here. They served the atmosphere of the right world, where old people with dark skin had no voice, where dogs, if allowed, were only purebred, on leashes and under the feet of those who deserve it. The camera that filmed everything was not supposed to work. The girl who held it in her hands, a student with blue hair, sat at the very edge of the room, came for the first time, by chance, simply because everyone said that their apple pie was delicious. She came with a friend, ordered a latte, sat quietly, but everything inside her was clenching. Not from the food, not from the smell, and from how it became clear at first glance, this is no place for those who are not one of us. And when Danny hit the dog, she already had the phone in her hands. Instinct, a journalist at heart, a blogger by vocation, she always filmed what haunted her. And the moment it all happened, she pressed record. Then she hid the phone in her bag. Then she left. And only at night, lying in bed, in the dark, with shaking hands, did she review the footage. Once, twice, 3 times. And each time she watched it, she felt worse. Because what was on the screen was not just violence. There was a system, faces that turned away, laughter, indifference, the suppressed pride of an old man, and the dog's death, slow, painful. She posted the video, without editing, without commentary, just a file with the caption, "Look what's happening in your city." Half an hour later, 1,000 views. An hour later, 10,000. In the morning, 100,000. By evening, 2 million. It flew like flames through dry grass, and the more people saw it, the louder their anger became. Not just because of the blow, because of everything behind it. Every frame told a story that many knew but couldn't show. Now it was on everyone's screen, in kitchens, in schools, on trains, on teenagers' phones, and on activists' feeds. but most importantly, in the hearts of those who had remained silent for too long. The restaurant tried to hush it up. The manager called a lawyer and said, "We need to remove it immediately, file a complaint, accuse them of slander." The lawyer watched the video and only said, "It's too late." They tried to file a police report. Violation of private property, invasion of privacy. But the report was rejected because the police had already received dozens of complaints about the restaurant for discrimination, for denial of service, for insults. They had been put off for years, and now they had picked them up, and the investigation began. Danny was gone. His phone was not answering. His address turned out to be fake. He had moved out 3 months ago, renting a room from an acquaintance who now disowned him. "I didn't know who he was," he told the reporter. But the reporter knew. Everyone knew. A flash mob started on social media. Iani Pine. People posted photos with dogs, with veteran parents, with signs, "Justice for Jazz." Someone wrote, "If he had hit a child, you would have said, 'A child doesn't bark.' But what if it was a white poodle?" Memes, articles, podcasts. News agencies went on air with headlines. Racism in the city centre. Restaurant has become a symbol of hate. The owners tried to distance themselves. They recorded a video, 2 minutes. "We condemn the behaviour of our employee, who has already been fired. We love all people." But their voices trembled and their faces were pale, because they knew that this video was not just about their restaurant. It was about the entire city, about the entire country, about the system they had protected, and now it was burning. People came to the white sheet with flowers, not in memory of the restaurant, but in memory of Jazz. They left notes. "You were better than us. Forgive us. We are not silent anymore." Someone put up a photo of an old man with a dog. Someone brought a kennel, a toy. And over all this, there was an atmosphere, like in a church after a tragedy. Quiet, deep, not theatrical. The old man did not appear for several days. He disappeared. No one knew where he was. Someone said they saw him in the animal cemetery. Someone, in the church. But no one could confirm. And only on the 4th day he came again, in the same clothes, without words. He stood in front of the restaurant, silently, and the crowd parted. Someone tried to approach him. He raised his hand, stopped with a gesture. Then he sat down on a bench, and so he sat, until dark, until the wind, until the first rain. People came. They sat next to each other, silently, without words, just presence. Someone brought a thermos of tea. He took it, nodded. That was all. The video lived on. It was copied, reposted, translated into other languages, in different countries, in different cities. And with each viewing, someone, somewhere understood. This is not just a story about one dog. This is a story about everything we allowed ourselves to do, hiding cruelty behind smiles. This is a story about humiliation that was hidden under the carpet for years. And now it has come to light, right on the screens, right in our faces, right in ourselves. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Have you ever had moments in your life similar to what you heard? What feelings did they evoke? It is important for us to know your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the continuation. And now we continue. On the 4th day after the video had flown around the country, the white sheet was no longer a restaurant. It had become a symbol. It had become a place where illusions ended. In the morning, the doors were still closed, the curtains drawn, but the sidewalk was already occupied. Dozens of people stood at the entrance, signs in their hands, cold determination in their eyes. Someone brought a portable speaker and turned on a recording of a dog's sound responses, plaintive, real. Someone wrote in chalk on the asphalt by the door, "Jazz, killed by indifference." This was not a protest in the classic sense, not a march, not slogans. It was an awakening. People did not come to scream. People came to look, to see what a place looked like where death had become the norm. And this looking was louder than any scream. Inside, the employees were afraid to open the door. The manager locked himself in his office, calling the owner every hour, repeating, "We need security. We need security. They will tear us apart." The owners didn't pick up the phone. They disappeared, hid behind lawyers and press releases. The number of people outside the restaurant grew. 50, 100, 150. Young, old, parents with children. Someone brought an old Labrador with a sign that said, "I'm Jazz too." A girl of about 8 came to the door and put a stuffed dog in front of it. No one touched her. People parted, as if before a monument. Then the graffiti began, on the walls, with markers, spray cans, chalk. Where there's a dog, there's a man. Where it was killed, there we are. If you were silent when the dog was beaten, you won't be heard when they hit you. One of the most striking, a white sheet is a white lie. It ran the entire length of the facade. Inside, the employees didn't know what to do. The kitchen was at a standstill. No one was chopping vegetables. No one was cooking soup. No one was talking. They sat as if on a ship going down. Someone was crying. The waitress, who had ignored the old man for years, now sat in the pantry and whispered, "I didn't know. I was just working." But she knew. Everyone knew. They just pretended not to see. Danny still hadn't shown up. Journalists, activists, lawyers were looking for him. Someone had leaked his name online, and now every post he'd made in the past had hundreds of comments. "Murderer." "I hope they do the same to you." "Break your leg. Feel what it's like." He didn't respond. One video showed the door of his old house, covered in paint. On it was a paw, painted red like blood. He was gone, but his name lived on, as a symbol of hatred. By lunchtime, the crowd outside the restaurant had become a stampede. The police showed up not to disperse them, but to observe. They didn't interfere, because they knew that if you took a step to the side, the cameras would film. Every phone recorded everything. Not a single blow, not a single mistake would remain without consequences. Then someone from the crowd threw the first. A stone. Small, sharp. It hit the display case with a ringing sound, like a signal. The first crack went across the glass like lightning across the sky. People sighed, but no one stopped it. A second later. A second. This time larger. This time with force. Impact. Ringing. The glass couldn't withstand it. The entire front panel fell down like a waterfall of shards. Someone screamed. Someone applauded. But no one intervened. This was not hooliganism. This was liberation. The shards of glass glittered in the sun, and in their reflection you could see everything. Years of silence, thousands of looks full of contempt, and every spoonful of soup served cold. The manager inside screamed, tried to shout something into the phone. "They are breaking us! They are killing us!" But no one listened. He rushed into the kitchen, demanded, "Give me a knife!" The cook refused, said, "I'm not with you," and walked out, through the broken door, silently. The people parted. He stepped into the crowd like one of them, and that was it. He was accepted. Someone nodded. Nothing more was needed. Signs went up, closed for good conscience. "This place kills." Someone drove a wooden cross into the ground in front of the restaurant. It read, "Jazz, killed for his look." The cameras were rolling. The live broadcast was on several platforms at once. People wrote in the comments, "This isn't just about a dog. This is about us. Each of us has been to this restaurant, or a restaurant like this." There were tears, anger, ashes. The old man didn't show up. They were waiting for him. Everyone hoped he would come, to see, to tell, to forgive. But he didn't come. Only in the evening, when the crowd began to disperse, did one guy notice a figure on a distant hill, on a bench near the church, in a coat, with a cane. He was sitting and watching, silently. He saw everything, and only one woman from the crowd came up and put her hand on his shoulder. He didn't turn around. He said, "I didn't want to destroy. I wanted them to hear, and now they're listening." But it's not a fact that they'll understand. She nodded, sat down next to him. No one else spoke. And the restaurant stood empty, with a gaping glass hole where the entrance should have been. The wind blew leaves inside. The stench. The past. No one would ever enter there again of their own free will. Because memory will never forget. Never. Jazz died. But the fear of silence died with it, and that means that someone had lived for a reason after all. They waited for 4 days. They said nothing. They watched the shop windows collapse, the curses painted on the walls with nails, the dog killed by one leg becoming a symbol of decades of pain. And they did nothing. No press conference, no official letter, just silence, cold, cowardly silence. The owners of the White Sheet, a man and a woman, a family, who lived outside the city in a quiet neighborhood with white picket fences and identical lawns, were not used to being forced to talk. They were the kind of people who always knew how to keep it within limits, how to not raise unnecessary things, and just do business. Their restaurant had never been a soul. It was an asset, revenue, a place where everything was controlled. The presentation of food, the music, the audience. They did not need to understand people like Melvin. They were satisfied that he paid. But now everything was out of control. Cameras were everywhere. They were getting calls from the TV channels. The newspapers wrote the headlines. And then, on the 5th day, they finally decided. The video is 3 minutes and 42 seconds long, shot in the living room of a house, a white wall, a painting, a reproduction of something neutral. The man is in a light shirt, the woman is in blue. Both are tense, their faces are squeezed out. He holds a piece of paper. She holds a cup. He speaks first. We would like to express our deepest regret regarding the recent events that took place in our establishment, and to state that the behavior of one of our employees does not reflect our values. A pause. She nods. He continues. We have been serving this area for over a decade and have always strived to create a safe, comfortable, and inclusive space for all customers. The words sound like they are part of a corporate presentation. A clock is ticking in the background. He is looking at the camera, but not directly, at a point nearby. She clutches the cup, as if afraid her fingers will lose their shape. He says, We were shocked and saddened by what happened. We immediately terminated the employee whose behavior caused such distress. He doesn't name her. He doesn't say what exactly happened, just behavior, response. As if he were talking about a joke at the checkout that went wrong. Then she says, We recognize the importance of dialogue and we are committed to it. We are committed to learning. We plan to review our HR policies and enhance our training on diversity and respect. We regret, he says again. We will also participate in an initiative to support animal rights organizations and, a pause, he looks at the paper, and minorities. He says it like he's swallowing a splinter. The video ends without applause, without soul, without real remorse. The comments below it are only on for the first 20 minutes. After that, they're off. But enough was enough. There's a storm under the first 1,000 messages. You don't even know the dog's name. You say animal, not dog. You are not people. Where is Melvin? Did you apologize to him in person? Where is Danny? Why is he not on camera? How much did they pay the PR guy for this script? People saw everything, and they heard the main thing. There was no pain in the voice, only fear. And not fear of what they caused. Fear of having to pay now. The video did not have time to cool down before it was parodied. Someone remade it on TikTok, with 2 mannequins who read papers emotionlessly. At the end, one of them throws the dog out of the frame. Millions of likes. Someone made a remix. Superimposed the words, "We understand the importance of dialogue," on a background recording of a crying child. Captioned, "When you were caught, not when you realized." And someone just posted a screenshot. The owner's face, a freeze frame on the word respect, and the caption, "They had no face until we broke the glass." The situation did not subside, it only grew. Journalists came to the restaurant, official ones, with microphones. They started filming, interviewing. One approached a woman who lit a candle by the broken door every day. He asked, "What are you waiting for now?" She answered simply, "I'm waiting for them to understand that we don't need an apology. We need places like this to no longer exist." The next day, an old man came, alone, without words. He stood by the display case. He looked inside. For a long time, people were silent. Cameras were filming. He stood there as if he were not just looking, but remembering. Every spoonful of soup, every phrase, every pause, every glance. And then, without saying a word, he put a bowl on the windowsill. Empty, metal, old, the same one that Jazz ate from. He put it down and left. People did not come up. The bowl remained. A symbol, a word spoken without words, an apology that was not heard. And inside the restaurant, through the cracks in the glass, a crow climbed, sat on the table, watched, like a judge, like a messenger, and no one dared to chase it away. The owners never came out again. Not a single new comment, not a single publication. They understood. When apologies are late, they do not save. They only reveal fear. They only reveal guilt, because words should precede actions and not follow destruction. But they chose silence, and then justification, and then a corporate template. And it became their epitaph. Now, White Sheet was not a restaurant. It became a lesson and a curse. On its wall now hung a sign, hung by someone at night, unofficial, grey, aluminum. Here they apologized, when it was no longer necessary. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Have there been moments in your life that left a deep mark, similar to what we describe? Share your thoughts. Your opinion is important to us. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the continuation. And now we continue. On Monday, the door didn't open. The sign remained up, but the light inside no longer came on. The open sign swayed in the wind, mockingly. The remains of broken glass lay by the threshold, like crumbs from a feast no one asked for. Inside, emptiness. The cash registers were closed. The tables were covered in dust. No one had come to clean. The staff had left. Some had quit. Some had fled. Some had wiped their tracks, as if they had never worked there. Only the metal bowl was still standing by the door, empty, heavy, with a frozen dent on the side, either from old age or from rage. No one touched it. It had become a monument. People came and looked, just stood. Sometimes bones were placed next to it, sometimes flowers, sometimes photos. But most of the time, nothing, just silence. No announcements, no official statements about the closure, but everyone knew. It was the end. The owners no longer contacted. Their suburban home was surrounded by journalists, but no one opened the doors. The windows were curtained. The online profiles were deleted. The restaurant's official website was frozen. The logo became an empty space on the screen. Only in one of the Telegram news channels did someone post a letter, supposedly internal, for former employees. Thank you for the years of work. Due to unforeseen reputational burden and physical threats, we are suspending the establishment's operations for an indefinite period. We ask that you maintain confidentiality. No apologies. No personal appeals. Only wording from a legal dictionary. And that's it. They were gone. But White Sheet remained. It remained, like a corpse on a street corner that no one dares to bury. And the more the days went by, the more the stench from this corpse penetrated the city. People began to remember. Everything. Someone remembered how he was not allowed to use the toilet when he was a black teenager. Some people said something like a waitress once. We don't serve coffee with milk to customers who are too dark. Some people said something like the we. Fi turned off when a dark-skinned group sat down at the table. People started talking, loudly, in schools, at meetings, on buses. Remember how they wouldn't seat us by the window? They said, "There are no seats." Remember how they gave us plastic dishes when everyone else ate from porcelain? And I remember how they laughed when you showed up in your national dress and called it zoo night. Everything was out in the open. Everyone knew, always knew. They just kept quiet. Because the white sheet was a status symbol. It seemed untouchable. It fed the illusion that whiteness was synonymous with safety. And now that illusion had crumbled to dust, and all that was left was the stench, the dead look, and the empty bowl. The authorities couldn't ignore it. The inspections began. The restaurant did not have a permit to work after 8, but they did. The fire inspector found dozens of violations. The labor inspector found unregistered employees. The tiles in the kitchen were contaminated with mold, which they knew about. And all of this surfaced, floated on the surface like forgotten garbage, and no one tried to hide it anymore. Because defending the white sheet became social suicide. One local deputy tried to say, "We should not judge a business by the mistake of one employee." An hour later, they made him delete the post, and a day later, remove him from the elections. Because now it was not a mistake, it was a system. And people began to understand they did not just go to eat, they paid for a lie, for a structure where humiliation was served under the source of tradition, where the waiter's gaze determined whether you were a man or a dog. And this gaze was now reflected from the broken glass, like a ghost. The old man did not come anymore. After he put the bowl down, he disappeared. They said he went to the village. They said he got sick. Someone saw him on the bus. Someone by the church wall. But no one could say for sure. He left the same way he came, without noise, as if he knew that everything that needed to be said had already been said, and that his voice would now speak in others, in everyone who was silent and no longer wanted to. In the place of the restaurant, there was now a skeleton. Someone was constantly tearing down the "For Rent" sign. Businessmen did not risk it. Brands did not come. People did not forget. Someone once scratched on the wall with a nail, "Do not enter. They kill here without a knife," and no one tried to erase it anymore. Closer to autumn, volunteers brought a stand. Wooden, small. They put it right on the site of the old entrance. On it, a photo of Jazz, a photo of a bowl, a photo of an old man, and the inscription, "You still can't hear." It became a memorial, a parable, a scar. And everyone knew, the restaurant will not return, even if someone buys this building, even if they tear down the walls, even if they put a new floor, there will still be an imprint in the concrete, blood, and a look, that same one, dead, piercing. Dogs slow down as they pass by. People do too, because memory lives, it breathes, it hurts. And white sheet is no longer a place. This is a warning. This is what happens when racism lives under the guise of just business, when humiliation becomes a style, when silence becomes the norm, and when it's too late to apologize, because the restaurant can be closed. But justice is just beginning. Melvin left the restaurant. He couldn't believe that this was really happening. It had all happened too fast. In an instant, his life had turned upside down. And now, looking back at the street, he still couldn't believe that such things could happen in real life. He walked slowly, walking along empty streets that no longer had those looks. The looks of those who had once looked at him with disdain, with a slight tightening of the lips, with undisguised disgust. As if he was someone who didn't deserve any attention or human treatment. This wasn't just a fight against the system. This was the moment when the system exposed itself. And now, in its ruins, there was only dust and emptiness. But that wasn't all. This restaurant wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a symbol of decades of oppression, silence, and indifference. When Melvin returned to the city, people began to open their eyes. Because his departure hadn't been easy, he was the first to say out loud, "I will not be silent anymore." And that word, spoken quietly, became an echo, echoing in every corner. People began to ask questions. People began to look at each other, realizing that their silence held an answer. Silence became guilty. The protests did not stop. And when a new sign finally appeared outside the restaurant, it was not an ordinary one. It was not something someone had put up outside. It was not just a "For Rent" sign. It was a reminder A reminder that if you choose to remain silent, you choose to side with oppression. And if you choose to remain silent, you become complicit. The door to the restaurant was sealed. The windows that once proudly read, "White Leaf," were now covered in black curtains. A sign stood at the entrance that read, "Permanently closed." But in that moment, as the restaurant closed, there was one camera left. One camera that was still recording. Because in all the pain and destruction left in the wake of the destruction of the White Leaf, there was something more. Something that kept filming, watching, recording. One of the most powerful signs of this destruction was that the videos that had started being shot on phones kept going viral. People were speaking out, lashing out at this restaurant, at these walls, at its employees, at everything that had once been considered normal in this place. All of these images, all of these stories, had gone viral, had become part of a cultural code that could not be erased. It was a new wave. A wave of silence, no longer being silent. This video showed that racism, hidden behind good manners, could no longer be tolerated. Everyone was watching and everyone was asking, "What did I do?" And the answers were coming, including answers in the form of stones, in the form of anger, in the form of questions like, "Why did we put up with all this?" People who had once come to this restaurant and thought nothing of what was happening could no longer watch this question calmly, and they knew that the white sheet would not close for a while. This restaurant was buried in memory. Its walls could no longer be saved by any apology. And when another man approached the very place where the door had once stood, he saw nothing but emptiness. But in his eyes, there was still that feeling that did not dry up, like ashes. He knew that it did not matter how long this process would continue. He knew that it would never be like before. And when the camera installed in one of the phones began recording again, it was recording not only that pain, but also those questions that could not be forgotten. Every question, every look, every pain became part of what could not simply be forgotten. Once, before everything collapsed, they sat in this restaurant, in different corners, in different parts of the room. Each of them thought that they could live without thinking about others, without thinking that every look, every gesture, could be a gesture of humiliation. But now everything had changed, and now it was impossible to undo it. They stood at the door, and in their eyes there was more than just anger. It was an understanding that the system does not change in a day. But that day had come. That day had arrived. And it was part of their lives. The camera was recording everything, and now no one could turn around and say they didn't see. They didn't know. They didn't hear. These questions, these moments of pain and humiliation, had become part of a new world where silence was not a solution. Silence had now become the voice of someone who could no longer remain indifferent. This was not just a video. It was a new understanding that each of us could be part of the system, but only if we continued to support it. Otherwise, if a person decided to come out and say, "I will not be silent," he would become part of a new movement, and his voice would be heard. Melvin was gone, but his mark remained. Jazz was gone, but his gaze remained. And now each of us could no longer be the same. The camera was still recording. And now that this story was over, it could not go unnoticed, because those who watch will never forget. What do you think about this story? Write in the comments if you have experienced racism or injustice in your life that left a mark. We really appreciate each of you, and your opinion is really important to us. Subscribe, like, and share this video if it touched you. Have a great day. Comment the phrase, "I will not be silent," so we know you are listening until the end.